All right, let's start our discussion of fabric. We're going to start with a real basic overview of fabric and some of the ways that it behaves, things to watch out for when drawing fabric. A lot of times when drawing fabric, we can get intimidated by all of the folds and the wrinkles and everything that's going on. But if we can keep in mind some basic rules, some basic things that fabric does, it can make our drawing a lot easier. It can help us decide how to move forward in the drawing, what to pay attention to, what to ignore, and so on. I'm trying something a little bit different this time too, where I'm looking at you, you're looking at me, and you're looking at my drawing at the same time. So hopefully that feels a little bit better. I don't know if it does or not, but that's going to allow me to talk as I draw a little more comfortably. All right, so if we're going to talk about fabric, one of the first things that we need to talk about is tension points. And I'm just going to put that up above. We need to talk about tension points, we need to talk about force, and we need to talk about the fabric edge. Thinking about those things is going to be our basic start here. All right, so I'm going to put a point on the page that I'm going to call a tension point. And if I imagine that I was pinning, so imagine this is a push pin, and I was pinning a square piece of fabric to a wall or something. Intuitively, we know if I pinned a piece of fabric at its corner, it wouldn't stay in this square position. If gravity is pulling it downwards, then that means everything is going to go to the farthest down point it can. So for this corner, that's already where it's at. It can't go down any further. This one wants to go down, but because it's pinned here, it's actually going to swing in until the fabric pushes it. It can't swing perfectly straight because the fabric is going to stop itself from swinging all the way in from this edge. Same on this edge, it'll swing into some arbitrary distance here. So that's where those corners are now going to be. They'll have sunk in. And then the edge is going to become irregular. And how do we draw that? It kind of doesn't matter is the reality. We'll just say it's that kind of squiggly edge. So that's my fabric edge. That's what has happened to it because gravity, that force, has pulled it downward, sort of gathered it together below this tension point. The next thing to know is that the edges of the fabric, the edges of the folds and the wrinkles and the forms of the fabric are all going to go back to that tension point. So that's easy on the edges. That new edge is here. It has swung in, so this is no longer there. This one has swung in, but it's introduced a bunch of new little folds, each of which has an edge. So if I'm going to blow this up, each of those edges now goes back to the vanishing point. You can see that's feeling kind of like fabric. This is a real basic version, but you could imagine this being the bottom edge of some fabric somewhere. So I'm just going to do this on this little piece of fabric, making sure they all kind of point back towards that tension point. Don't forget about this back one. So that's what that fabric is going to do when I pin it just at that single point. And we can see there it feels kind of like fabric. These folds have a name. These sort of half circle, it's like this. There's a tension point. There's this curve. We'll stop it here. This type of fold, this single fold back to one tension point, is called a pipe fold, presumably because a pipe is a cylinder like this, and these folds are kind of cylinder-like. They're like half cylinders over and over and over again. So that's called a pipe fold. Anytime you have fabric with one tension point and nothing else, it'll tend to arrange itself into these pipe folds, these straight down pipe folds. Let's look at a few versions of that. I'm just going to invent some fabric here, and I'm going to expect you to do this in your sketchbook. Just play with it. Think about fabric edge, an irregular fabric edge, a tension point, and pipe folds going back. That's basically it. So what's an irregular edge? Fabric tends to have this loopy edge. It's not, unless it's been ironed flat, it's not going to have as sharp edges anywhere. They're going to kind of flow. And I'm just making that up. Say my tension point is up there. I like to add a little loop. little sense of some folds coming out of it. And then I just run these edges back. There's my fabric. And it's invented, it's not, when I'm looking at the fabric, I can make this irregular edge be like the one I'm looking at. This one's just kind of random, arbitrary. So this is some fabric hanging from one tension point. What happens if I elongate that tension point into what I'm going to call a tension bar? So you can think of this as like a curtain rod maybe. A curtain rod holds up the fabric all along it. So the fabric is being supported all along that bar. A push pin only supports it in one point, like one location, but a curtain rod holds it up all the way along the rod. So I'm gonna deal with the same, my tension point has now turned into a bar, but my irregular edge is still there. It's still gonna be the same. And this is a little exaggerated. If this were true curtains, the way they tend to hang, it's gonna be, more like, that's more of a curtain bottom. And I'll do a bigger version of that down here. It's kind of like that. So now all I need to do is go back to the tension bar. Where do my form contours, where does my fabric go back to? Well, presumably this is one long square of fabric that's attached up here. And I'm gonna go ahead and add just some sense of some ruffles up here. So we'll turn this upper edge into a bunch of ruffles that have some folds shooting out from there. Some creases or, well, folds. So this is the same fabric as down here. It's just kind of been gathered in along that bar. So this edge of the fabric is gonna go up to that edge. This edge of the fabric is gonna go up to this edge. The center of the fabric is gonna go towards the center. And I'm just gonna split the difference here. Don't forget about that back edge. This back edge, it's really important to get the front and back edge. That's where our dimension comes from. It comes from having these edges that go behind and these edges that are out in front. Carry on with these. And you can see it's just consistency and knowing these parts that gives you a really convincing sense of fabric. And I'm gonna keep it basic like this, like you could gather those curtains in the center. In fact, if I were to just do that very, very simply, I'd still have my irregular edge. I'd still have my tension bar, everything's the same. Only now interrupting the flow straight up is some kind of thing. So that's gonna be my new area of tension. And all these go into that, and all of these head. It's almost just like a new tension bar halfway through and slightly thinner. Here the form edges are still flowing towards tension points. There just happens to be a few more. There's a tension bar here. There's a wider kind of tension bar there. So we get this flow in and then back out. Don't worry about this one so much. That was just an example to show you where you could go with it. This is what we're gonna be dealing with right now. Just dealing with these pipe folds, this irregular bottom edge, tension bar. All right, so that's one tension point or one tension bar with pipe folds. There's a thing that happens when you introduce another tension point. So let's go one here, one there. What happens is between these two tension points, so we can imagine almost like we have this piece of fabric there. What's gonna happen in this piece of fabric? Well, this center piece here is gonna tend to sag. How far can it sag? It depends on how much fabric you have in between the two tension points. Sometimes it can sag pretty drastically, sometimes it's relatively tight. I'm gonna split the difference and say, that's about my sag. And what you will see when there are two tension points is you'll see this U shape, this smile, that's gonna get steeper each time. It just repeats itself down, 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 and gets steeper as it goes. And it's not it doesn't repeat itself perfectly. It's just this kind of a thing. Shallower, steeper, steeper still. Back up to this tension point. And then with this extra fabric that's off to the side, we'll get that same pipe fold thing. It's just fabric and one tension point. This fold is called a diaper fold. Go figure. I don't know why. I guess it looks like a diaper hanging on a clothesline or something. We're still dealing with flow and tension points. It's just the tension point here flows down and starts to get gathered up by that one, so it flows back up to that tension point. That's all. And those don't need to be in the same place either. Those tension points, they don't have to be perfectly even from each other. What happens if there's one up here and one down there? Well, we're going to have a U shape that gets steeper, and then we're going to have some leftover fabric with some pipe folds there. Maybe this one's hidden. Maybe we're seeing this from an angle and it's hidden, and we just see a little peeking out there. That's going to give me a relatively decent feel of that fabric. Okay, so that's 2 tension points. And we're going to kind of stay there. The rabbit hole of fabric goes down deep. You can talk about different types of folds in clothing, different types of fold when you twist fabric, and so on. For now, we're just going to stick with this. Though I encourage you, if you're interested, if this takes off for you and clicks, study fabric. There's a bunch of stuff to learn about it. For now, we're going to stay here. All right, there's only one other thing that I want to talk about, and that's movement. Movement with the fabric. So thus far, we've only kind of had pretty static fabric, and I'm going to use the single tension point to do this because I think it's the simplest, it's the most straightforward. If I have one tension point and an irregular edge, my fabric doesn't have to go straight back to that point. Like, what happens if the fabric is moving a particular way? Or what happens if the wind is blowing or something? It's going to affect that fabric and make it feel like it's moving. To do that, all I need to do is I'm going to think about the edges first. What is the movement of this fabric like? Let's say it's being blown this way, or it's like moving this way. Then all of my lines, instead of going straight back to that vanishing point, they're going to follow a swoop back to that vanishing point. Say vanishing point, tension point. It's kind of a vanishing point. So there's some fabric that has a sense of sweep to it. And again, it's a real basic, just invented piece of fabric, but it gets at the idea behind fabric, which is we have this edge somewhere, and the flow of the folds heads back to this tension point. Maybe I have a tension bar here and an irregular edge there. Right, there's some more movement. It's kind of swirling over the top of the other one. Right, and that has to do with the flow of these folds. And I could just carry on and on and on, filling this page up with those. I know I said that was all I wanted to talk about. There is one more thing, and it has to do with these sticks. So I'm using a conte stick for this. It's this square stick. If I lay this stick down on its side, so instead of tilting it up and drawing with it like it's a pencil, if I lay it on its side and then turn it onto a corner, so that looks like if this is my paper surface and this is a cross section of that stick, I'm holding a corner down to the page like that. That's going to help me draw fabric in a way that feels like it's almost being shaded already. So here's maybe that with one tension point. So there's my tension point. You can see this has a different feel than what I drew before. I'm holding it on its side and I'm getting a lot of this. If you remember way back when we did the line variety and I quickly brought out one of these conte sticks and showed you the variety that it's capable of. You can capitalize on that in fabric drawing really rather effectively. So let's say I have a two tension point fabric drawing. And I don't need to put the points in, I'm just gonna imagine them. On this, I can now draw some more specific lines. Right, pretty quickly that's starting to feel atmospheric and almost shaded. And it just has to do with laying the stick on its side and getting some variety out of it. I bring that up because you're doing your drawing in conte. Your longer drawing is going to be in conte on toned paper. I would use it maybe this way to start with, to gesture in the fabric. It's going to give your fabric a kind of a resolved look a lot quicker than if you drew it in meticulously with the end of this conte. All right, that covers it for fabric. The things to remember: tension points, force, movement. Think about that irregular fabric edge. All right, that's it.